560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We finally got Trump to announce a expected and important addition to his public health team. And that's our friend Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford.
Yay.
Dr. Jay was a party to that Murthy v. Missouri suit on social media censorship, who was targeted along with other scientists, doctors like Kaldorf and Makari and Gupta, Sunetra Gupta, and many others for daring to question COVID orthodoxy. This is just refreshing the recollection here. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya testifying before a committee on COVID policies, along with his colleague and his colleague again, Dr. Marty Makari, who is going to be the FDA commissioner.
Public health bureaucrats operate more like dictators than scientists during the pandemic, sealing themselves off from credible outside criticism. Consider, for instance, the treatment of scientific dissidents outside the government who contradicted public health dogma. In the earliest days of the pandemic, public health bureaucrats organized a cover-up of the hypothesis that COVID emerged as a result of a laboratory leak, calling scientists who proposed the idea conspiracy theorists. Only recently have official bodies started to admit the hypothesis is plausible and maybe even true, and certainly not a conspiracy. Where do the scientists whose careers were destroyed advancing the idea go to get their reputations back? When Martin Kulldorff of Harvard University here today, Sunetra Gupta, a professor at Oxford University, and I proposed a focused protection alternative, not a herd immunity alternative, to lockdowns in October 2020, then NIH director Francis Collins labeled the three of us fringe epidemiologists and engaged a media campaign to take down our proposal, to which tens of thousands of doctors...
And now he's the NIH director, or he's going to be.
Oh,
that is a wonderful bit of boomerang that Trump has affected, isn't it?
And remember, he was co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration as well. So
that's right. I mean, again, we talked about this ad nauseum during the pandemic and these COVIDian, heavy-handed COVIDian policies. Stanford, Harvard, Oxford represented. We could go on. Yale, Cleveland Clinic, some of the best research institutions, best hospitals, most accomplished medical professionals. And if you didn't just fall in line with Collins and Fauci and Birx, then
you were silenced.
You were targeted. Even if you weren't completely silenced, you were certainly targeted, and there was a great effort undertaken to marginalize you. He's right about that. This was a fun exchange, too. These guys could be fun together, Dr. J and Dr. Marty, Bhattacharya and Makari, talking about, in a little podcast, talking about Fauci and Walensky. There's another one. Don't forget about Rochelle Walensky, CDC director. And, you just want, obviously there's going to be different mission foci here, and there's going to be a lot to do. But just given the opportunity, even if it's not them doing it directly, but unearthing information that the Rand Pauls and the Ron Johnsons can use for that long overdue reckoning, even if it's just publicly and professionally, for the Faucis and the Birxes and the Collins. Take a listen to these two.
I think the question is, why is the Biden administration still using its leverage to protect Dr. Fauci and his reputation? Why is that a major goal of the Biden administration's policies?
He's still the golden boy, Dr. Fauci, of so many communities in the United States that have sworn a political allegiance to maintain political apartheid in America, so that scientists who believe in a lab leak are separate. They're separate but equal, maybe not even separate but equal, but they do not go to the same panels. They are not invited to the same editorial boards. They don't have the same rights in publishing and in science. It's I don't know if you saw this. This is delicious. Did you guys see this? Rochelle Walensky just last week receives the Anthony B. Fauci Courage and Leadership Award from the Infectious Diseases Society of America.
I'm frankly stunned. I mean, I guess suppose it does take some measure of courage to say things that are entirely contrary to reality confidently, and know that you're going to somehow fool half the country into believing that you're right. And Rochelle Walensky, I think, fully deserves an award. I mean, in some sense, it's quite fitting that she get an award with his name on it.
The things that are fitting. It's also quite fitting that Makary and Bhattacharya, along with Weldon, CDC, and RFK Jr. over the top at HHS, are the public health.
Well, thank you so much for having me on this great morning.
How do you react to this team that Trump has assembled, at least in terms of nominees?
Well, I mean, Jay's great. He's we've had many conversations about, during COVID, about the COVID vaccines. He's smart. He's really humble. He's really thoughtful. He's skeptical. He's willing to, to consider everybody's views. He's
the anti-Fauci. Yeah.
He doesn't have a big ego. He is the anti-Fauci. And, it's funny because sometimes people would say to me during COVID, you should be more like Jay. You should, you're so loud and obnoxious. Why don't you make your points the way Jay does? And I would say, well, look, they went after him too. So it really wasn't about being loud and obnoxious. It was just about saying things that they didn't like. It's an interesting thing because Jay is obviously an elite scientist too, right? And so is Dr. Makary. These are hard jobs. They need smart people, and sometimes those people, are going to come from really fancy institutions, and we need to be okay with that. I think everyone is okay with that in the case of Jay and Makary. RFK is a more complicated question. He clearly wants to knock things around, and that's good. Some of his specific views, I don't agree with. I don't think it's helpful to say that HIV might not cause AIDS. Okay, HIV causes AIDS. I'm not sure why he even entertains that notion. And if you want to talk about the bad things that science has done in the last, let's say, 10 years, you should talk about some of the good things that have happened in the last 30 or 40 years. And certainly the finding of a cure for HIV, saving people from AIDS, which was a deadly disease, which I'm old enough to remember, which you are old enough to remember. It was a death sentence in the 1980s and early 1990s, and we shouldn't dismiss the what science did for us, what the NIH did for us, and I think that's a bit dangerous. But as for Jay and as for Martin Makary, I have nothing but good things to say.
Yeah, the RFK Jr. thing is complicated on a range of matters. One is some of his positions on issues, including outside of public health, like environmental issues. So the need for him to stay in his lane. Number two is, he's now another one of these nominees who's subject to sexual harassment allegations. Now, again, they're 20 years old, but a former babysitter / intern, who's willing to testify before the Senate committee. So this could become a real spectacle. So, he's got I'm not saying he's not going to get confirmed or that Trump won't back him the way that he backed Kavanaugh when they came for Kavanaugh. But it does present some complications.
Yes, I agree with that. And, is there somebody who Trump could have nominated who would have been like RFK but without the baggage? I'm not actually sure that there is. I mean, RFK is a pretty unique figure, and he clearly speaks to a lot of people who are very frustrated and upset with the scientific establishment. And so, I do think in many ways it's even more important to have people underneath him who can maybe steer those impulses in good ways. And, that's what Jay should do. I don't know the new CDC director. I don't know, this congressman, but hopefully he'll do that too. and certainly Marty will do that.
And no matter who gets it, though, the HHS secretary, don't you want to have a full investigation into the impacts of COVID mRNA vaccines?
Absolutely.
We have a right to know about that.
Yeah, in my Substack, I said, a couple of days ago, here are 10 things that RFK Jr. can do, which would be great, unequivocally. Would put sort of big pharma on its back foot. Would put the scientific establishment on its back foot in an important way. From investigating, figuring out how to rein in prescription drug advertising a little bit or a lot, to instituting a rule that nobody can leave the FDA or the CDC and go work for a drug company within 3 years. I mean, you had Scott Gottlieb, who Trump appointed at the FDA to run the FDA, who quit the FDA in 2019, and 90 days later was on the board of Pfizer. Okay, that should never happen again. And he can, if RFK and Trump put rules through to make sure that doesn't happen again, all by itself, that would be a good thing. So I haven't taken a position on RFK at HHS, but if channel his impulses in a good way, that would be great.
Well, and I think one of the recommendations you made too in that Substack piece you were referencing is that the release of documents related to the lab leak, related to the Fauci relationship with Dr. Ralph Baric, and I would suggest a long list of other people too. But this is consistent with, frankly, what RFK Jr. has said generally in the interest of transparency, and what the Trump administration, what Trump through his cabinet pick seems to be signaling, that this information that is under dubious cover, over classification of documents and so forth. This stuff needs to come out. There needs to be at least a full airing if we're going to even contemplate the possibility of holding some people responsible for committing bad acts, and distinguishing between incompetence and bad acts, incompetence and maliciousness.
We'd all love to know who's protecting Ralph Baric, right? Is it the CIA? Is it the DIA, right? The idea that Ralph Baric has not sort of become the focus of attention, of investigation, is crazy. He is more responsible than any other American for the collaboration with the Chinese scientists that likely produced COVID.
Right. And just refresh our audience's recollection a little bit on Barrick's background and the substantiation for the point you made.
Sure. So he is a scientist at the University of North Carolina. He's been researching coronavirus for 30 years. He's probably the world's foremost expert on the laboratory manipulation of coronavirus. And what people forget, or some people forget, is that in 2003 there was a coronavirus outbreak called SARS, which had a very high mortality rate in people who got it. It was about 10%. And that got the attention of Tony Fauci and NIH, and they sort of worked with Baric to try to figure out what they were calling a pan-coronavirus vaccine, research, meaning a vaccine against all different kinds of coronavirus, to research, which coronaviruses might come out of caves in China and actually be more lethal. Baric was doing this with the full knowledge and encouragement of Tony Fauci. Fauci had an event at NIH in 2013, which I wrote about. In fact, this reminds me, I'm probably going to repost this piece, which I wrote about a few months ago, where Baric spoke extensively about the need for this kind of research, and he was collaborating with the Wuhan Institute. And the most likely way that coronavirus emerged in late 2019 is a leak from that lab. And they were working with Ralph Baric. Now, that doesn't mean that Ralph Baric knew the exact experiment that they did that might have produced this. And we've seen emails where he expresses concerns about the level of safety in the Wuhan lab for some of this experimentation. But nonetheless, he didn't walk away. He continued to work with these people. And in 2019, coronavirus emerged and devastated the world economy, killed a whole bunch of, old sick people and some, a handful of young healthy people. And nobody has really ever gotten to the bottom of Ralph Baric's association either with Tony Fauci or with the lab. We've gotten pieces, but we haven't gotten to the bottom of it.
The other matter, too, is just the impact of the vaccine and the boosters, with Travis Kelce out there telling everybody to get their 70-second booster. The additional research that needs to be done here. I mean, there was this study that was done in King County, Washington State, where 98% of the population received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine by 2023, and they document a significant increase in excess fatal cardiopulmonary arrests. And, is there a correlation? Is there causation? Is there particular profiles? But I mean, with all of this, the zeitgeist for the vaxes and the boosters, and it's still going on a much smaller scale, assessment of health impact in different cohorts of Americans, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years removed, seems to be something that needs to be first order.
Yes, if we can even do it, because the clinical trials were essentially blown up in early 2021, so we don't have clean data. But yes, we need to try to do that. What I wrote yesterday is the thing that Kennedy can do on the COVID vaccines that is unquestionably that needs to happen day one is they are still recommending these vaccines in the United States for healthy kids, adolescents, even babies over 6 months old. And that is disgusting. It is wrong. We're not the Europeans aren't doing it. The Australians aren't doing it. Other, sort of advanced countries aren't doing it. We're only doing it here because the CDC won't admit that this was completely unnecessary to give to healthy kids, even the first shot. So they're still pushing this. And guess what? There are still incidents happening. There are still kids getting myocarditis. You can see the reports in VAERS. And whoever is involved with that needs to be fired. Okay. One other thing that he could and should do is we should have a real clinical trial for flu vaccines. They're not vaccines, but flu shots. Okay. We should spend $100 million and put 40,000 people in a big trial over the course of a winter and see if actually the flu vaccine does anything for those people. Because we get 200 million people a year, 180 million people a year vaccinated against the flu. It's not clear it's helpful at all in terms of reducing deaths or serious injury, serious illness from flu. The data is incredibly messy. We should just, if RFK could do that, or Jay Bhattacharya could do that, all by itself, that would be a good thing. And, you notice I'm not talking about like the measles vaccine or something like that. I'm not qualified. I don't discuss those. I haven't looked into the science. I don't really know whether there's any good evidence that those vaccines cause autism, but I know about the respiratory virus vaccines, and they don't work very well, and we need to admit it, and we need to research it.
Alex Berenson, he's the author of Pandemia, How Coronavirus Hysteria Took Over Our Government, Rights, and Lives, and his Substack, Unreported Truths, which you find at alexberenson.substack.com. Alex, thank you as always.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This is Sean Thompson. When you go on vacation, does it make sense to have somebody else pack for you? Of course not. The same can be said for your retirement. Your 401k could be packed with things